Well, good morning, Light in the Valley. Man, I think if we could just sit in that space we were in there for the next 45 minutes, I'd be perfectly fine with that. I got a picture of the wind of the Spirit just circling through your congregation. Is it possible to turn those? I can't see. I'm kind of blinded here. Um, of the Spirit just blowing through your congregation and just His presence just circling through. And I'm confident that's a picture of what you guys are asking for and praying for and wanting to receive. And so as we were just in that moment exalting our Lord and Savior, I got that picture. So I wanted to share that with you. Um, but it's great to be here. It's great to be with you. You guys feel like family. I know I've been here several times, like Brennan said, and have been here on behalf of Aim Right Ministries in Phoenix, Arizona. And life has drastically changed for me and my family in the last 9 months, 10 months here. It's kind of funny. Husbands, raise your hands. I'm just gonna throw this out as a warning. Be careful how you crack jokes about your mother-in-law. Okay, so the last time I was here, I kind of cracked a joke about my mother-in-law. She was visiting our family in Phoenix, and Wally had invited me to come and give a message for Mission Sunday, and I gladly accepted on behalf that my mother-in-law, if she's listening, she loves this, so if I accepted that invitation knowing that my mother-in-law was going to be in town and I could kind of get out of the house, you know. If husbands, if you know what I'm talking about, can I get an amen? You guys are like, I want a good lunch. I want peace in the house. I get it. So be careful about how you joke because I'll tell you right now, I'm living in her basement. So God has a great sense of humor. And so Jimmy's not here, Brennan, whoever. If you guys need any help around here throughout the week, if you guys need some weekends me to fill in preaching, I'll gladly come up on the weekend. Vera, if you're listening, I love you. You're a great mother-in-law. So, but like I said, our life for our family has drastically changed. I've experienced some things in the past 2 weeks that I haven't had to experience for a long time. Living in the Midwest is no joke. You've got to rake leaves. You've got to blow them out of the yard. You've got to chop them up with the mower. You've got to take the garden hose off the house so it doesn't freeze. This time of year in Phoenix, you sit on the front porch and you watch the sun and you soak in the sun and you have a nice ice cold beverage on your front porch enjoying life. You don't have to take the garden hose off, rake the leaves. A snowblower? Oh man, I don't know. God called us back here. I have confidence in that, but man, sometimes I wonder why we wanted to live in Ohio again. But man, we just kind of got to a place for our family where some things needed to change. Aim Right Ministries is a place that I hold dear in my heart. We love it. It's probably one of the hardest decisions to move there and begin a new life there. And as we discovered, it was one of the hardest decisions to transition. We willingly said, hey, we need to transition out of our leadership role at Aim Right and relocate our family for the sake of our family. We needed to be more intentional in living close together as a as a family. And so through that transition, obviously got to find a job, find a place to work, and I was approached by CMC, Conservative Mennonite Conference, the conference that your church is a part of. And they said, hey, we'd like to extend this offer to you and have you join our team as Church Planting Catalyst. Well, when I introduced myself as Church Planting Catalyst, some people, they just look the opposite way, right? When we hear the word church planting, kind of a scary phrase, kind of a scary thing, but I'm really excited to be a part of the leadership team there at CMC, and in my new role, I've got the privilege and the opportunity to work with and coach church planters, young couples. We actually have a young couple down in Morgantown, West Virginia right now that are working with international students, planting a church in that community there. I had the privilege, some of you guys are familiar with Hemisphere Coffee, had the privilege of working with Paul Kurtz earlier this year. They planted a church in their coffee shop. They meet in their warehouse facility on a Sunday morning. They're probably breaking into the egg casserole right about now, but they gather in their warehouse and they have church. And so I had the privilege of working with him earlier this year, and so it's a joy to come alongside of churches that are growing and busting at the seams and helping them to discover, God, what would you have for us? I get that privilege to walk alongside young people and couples that are trying to discern what God has for them in their lives. And so it's just a real joy and privilege to be a part of. So we're going to talk a little bit about church planning this morning, but more along the lines of what we're going to talk about this morning is kind of steps to get us to that place. It's steps. It's kind of the building blocks, the foundations of getting to a place to plant a church. And so I want to get into that. I did want to introduce my family real quick, if we can get a picture of them. Our families bring a lot of joy, don't they? Our kids bring a lot of joy. This is my daughter, Madison, over here. She's about to be 13, so pray for me. I think she's been 13 for a couple of years now. No joke. I know we joke about those things, but seriously, we've been at that stage, I feel like, for a while. And she's a 7th grader. She's a volleyball player. She has big dreams of becoming a veterinarian, working with cows and horses and kind of big animals. So another reason, living in the inner city, there's not cows on every corner. So we had to come back to a rural community to kind of give her some of those experiences. This is my son, Carter. He's 8, and man, he's a firecracker. He's a spitfire, never sits still, and always moving. He plays soccer. He's in the 3rd grade, and he's loving life, being out in the country, and all those kind of things. My wife, Stephanie, in a couple weeks, we'll be celebrating 16 years of marriage. It's been great. It's been a great journey. The bulk of that has been spent in our time in Phoenix, but as we readjust to life here in Central Ohio, for Stephanie and I, Plain City has been home, and so we're excited to bring our kids back home. And introduce them to life back there. And so if you think about it, pray for our family. It's a continual transition. It's a continual just adjusting, learning new things, learning how to reintegrate with family again and find our friend group, find a home church, things like that. So if you think about it, just pray for our family and keep us in your prayers. The title of my message this morning is The Table. I don't know what brings you here this morning. I don't know what brought you to church. I don't know if you just needed to come and sit and worship. I don't know if you came anticipating a word from the Lord. I don't know if you came anticipating an encouraging message. I don't know what came this morning, but I pray that you walk away challenged. I pray that you walk away encouraged, and I pray that you walk away wanting to take some next steps. I'm a man of action. I don't like to sit back. I don't like to sit still. It's probably where my son gets it. But I like to see action. I like to see motion. I like to see movement. And so this morning, the title of the message is The Table. When I say the table, you might think of your dining room table in your current home. You might think of your childhood dining room table. I know when we grew up, we had this really cool, I don't know what the proper term is, like Formica table maybe, like, it's kind of grayish, whitish top. And we had these awesome fake leather gray chairs on wheels that you could spin and you could rock back and forth. And I'm trying to get my wife to get a set of something like that, but she's absolutely against it. But I don't know what your dining room table represents in your life. For me, it's a place where we shared meals with our families. It's a place where my dad, punished me and told me, things need to straighten up. You need to straighten up. Maybe when I say the table, you think about your favorite restaurant and the table that you sit at every time, or your favorite coffee shop and the table where you sit and you meet with friends and you sit and you have a cup of coffee. Maybe think about the wild and crazy games of spoons. Does anybody play spoons anymore? I know that game can get kind of violent. My wife's childhood dining room table has gouges out of it because of spoons. They were violent, so I don't play. But maybe your dining room table has glitter stuck to it, or paint stains from a child's craft project or a school project. Maybe your dining room table is where you sat and you dreamed with your wife about what you wanted to do and the family that you wanted to have. You sit down with your friends and you dream about your futures together and you build community. Our tables are a sacred place. Our tables are a place where we can invite people in and they get to see another side of us that maybe they don't get to see in public, or maybe they get to see a different side of us that they don't see here at church or places like that. Our dining room table is a place that we anticipate the day that we get to decorate for our child's birthday, or we get to decorate for a holiday. A table is a place where we make our favorite meal for our friends. And it's in those meals that barriers are broken down, walls are broken down, and we share this intimate experience with each other. Jesus spent time at tables, not his table because I don't think he had one. He spent time at other people's tables, sitting and living life and breaking bread and living in community with one another. If you want to turn to Matthew chapter 9, I've got it up here on the screen as well, but if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 9, I'm going to be in 9 verses 9 through 13. Matthew chapter 9 verses 9 through 13 says this. It says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what it means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. The same account takes place in Luke, and I like how it's written in there. It says, then Levi, who we know as Matthew, held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. Who was sitting at Jesus' table? Who was Jesus breaking bread with? Who was Jesus communing with? It was the people the Pharisees and the religious rulers, they looked at Jesus and they said, how could you sit with these people? How could you associate with these people? How dare you break bread with the tax collectors? I don't know about you, but where I live in Plain City, everybody complains twice a year when the letters come out from the treasurer's office for property taxes. Everybody complains. Nobody has anything good to say about the county treasurer 2 times a year. The rest of the time, they could care less. But that 2 times a year, when that envelope comes in the mail, people do not like the treasurer. In those days, the tax collectors, they were crooked. They were not well liked. They had their own group. They had their own dirty, rotten band of people that they hung out with. They were the sinners of the community. Yet Jesus went to those people. I'm reminded of the story of Zacchaeus, and Jesus is coming into town, and he's hanging out with the kids, and Zacchaeus climbs in the tree, and Jesus goes to Zacchaeus, and he says, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm coming to your house. I'm coming to your house to hang out with you today. I'm coming to build community. I'm coming to build a relationship with you. I think of Jesus interacting with the Samaritan woman at the well. That was a no-no. That was something that was not supposed to happen. That was something that was looked down upon, let alone Jesus and a woman, a Jew and a Samaritan. That was nothing that was supposed to take place. But Jesus sat and he listened to the woman at the well. I'm reminded of the story of Jesus walking through the crowd of people, and the woman with the issue of blood, she approaches Jesus and she touches the hem of his garment, and he feels the power go from him to her, and he stops and said, "Who touched me?" He didn't keep walking. He didn't say, "Get out of my way, get out of here." He stopped, and it says he turned and he looked for the person who touched him. He pursued them. My question for us this morning is, who is sitting at our table? Church, who are we inviting into our sacred space? Are we inviting people that think the same way that we do? Are we inviting people that live and look, smell the same way? Who are we inviting into our table? Now, I understand when I start talking about some of these things that sometimes our mind can say, well, what about the people in our church? What about our young people that we're supposed to disciple? We don't need to neglect those things. We need to continue to disciple and mature the body of believers. We need to continue to pour in. Proverbs 27:17 says, it takes a grinding wheel to sharpen a blade, and so one person sharpens the character of another. Church, we need to be intentional about discipling. I love seeing this young family up here. You guys are more brave than I ever would be to bring my kids to the front row. But we need to grow and raise our young people up so they can see how we live our lives. A couple of weeks ago, my daughter, who's in 7th grade, on Friday afternoons, they have this thing called Faith and Fun, and it's a faith-based program that they're allowed to have. She's in a public school, and they were doing a special event off campus. I went to pick her up, and I'm at this place in Plain City, and I'm waiting for her, and a mother comes up, and she says, "Hey, are you Madison's mom?" No. Hold on, back up. Are you Madison's dad? And I said, yeah. And she said, I just want to say thank you. Madison invited her daughter to be a part of this Faith and Fun community, this Faith and Fun program, to where she could come and join this group of young people on a Saturday or Friday afternoon. Do you know how much joy that brought me? To see my daughter living this out on her school campus. It brought so much joy. And I tell her every time she does something like that, and my son as well, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you, the way that you're living your life. Parents, if we sometimes wonder, and I'll be honest, sometimes I wonder if my kids are getting it, but it's those simple reminders right there that they get it. They're watching. They're observing. If you ever want to know how much your kids observe you, listen to how your kids talk to your dog. If you have a dog, I've noticed that my son will yell at my dog and say different phrases to our dog, and I'm like, that sounds kind of familiar. It sounds kind of like what I'm saying or how I talk or different things. And so they pick it up. They're listening. We need to continue to sharpen and grind. We can go back to the who's at our table slide. Who are we inviting into that sacred space? There's no denying that the world around us is falling apart. It's been falling apart for thousands of years, but we see it constantly. I woke up at 5:30 this morning and I rolled over and my phone had multiple Twitter alerts, 150 people injured, 50 people dead. This happened, that happened. There was multiple things that have happened in the last 24 hours. We get this steady stream of negative. We get this steady stream to see the brokenness that our world is dealing with. Church, what are we doing about it? What are we doing about it? Are we sitting back and are we sitting in our comfort of our home and are we afraid to approach and broach or breach the darkness? Are we afraid to invite our neighbor to our table? Are we afraid to invite somebody and invite somebody that doesn't think or look or live the way we do? Are we worried what our neighbors will think if we invite those people to our table? Do we have compassion for the lost? I've been reading a book here in the past couple weeks, and it's kind of rereading it through. It's called Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire by Jim Cymbala. He's the pastor of the Brooklyn Tabernacle. And he says this, he says, Christians often hesitate to reach out to those who are different. They want God to clean the fish before they catch them. If someone's gold ring is attached to an unusual body part, if the person doesn't smell the best, or if the skin color is not the same, Christians tend to hesitate. But think for a moment about God reaching out to us. If ever there was a reach, that was it. The holy, pure deity extending himself to us who were soiled, evil-hearted, unholy. God could have said, you're so different from me, so distasteful, I would really rather not get close to you. But he didn't say that. It was our very differentness that drew his hand of love. Jesus didn't speak healing words to the lepers from a distance of 30 yards. He touched them. He touched them. For the past several weeks, I keep coming back to that phrase and that section of this book. I keep coming back to that and I say, God, I want to live this in my life. I can remember when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. Again, I grew up in Plain City. I grew up in a law enforcement family. I don't know if I've ever shared that with any of you guys, but my dad was a deputy sheriff. My mom was a radio dispatcher and pastor's kids. If there's any pastor's kids, you think life's rough as a PK, try being the son of a sheriff and a radio dispatcher. You can't hide anything. But my dad was the kind of person that it didn't matter. He reached out. It didn't matter. He would extend his hand to help and serve those around us, whether he was with the badge or without the badge. But I remember being pretty young, and we went went into town for an event on a Saturday night. And we're there, and we were cruising. I don't know if you guys remember, like the early 90s, the Plymouth Voyager minivans, brown wood paneling. That was us. It's fantastic. Oh, man. Every once in a while in Arizona, I'd see one of those for sale. I'm like, oh, I've got to have one of those. It's the coolest thing ever. But we're cruising to town in that thing, and we're at this event, and the event's kind of coming to an end. And I see my dad over here talking to a family. And I can Dad, I don't think you should be talking to them. They look a little different, smell a little funny, talk a little funny. And I remember Dad walking out. He said, come on, let's go. And we're walking out, and this family is walking out with us. And I just remembered these overwhelming feelings of Dad, no, they're not coming with us. The Cotton family is who this family was. The Cotton family, they're not getting in the van with us. I've heard the stories. I've heard you talk about the struggles that this family has. we're not giving them a ride home. I remember getting closer to the van and the family's right there with us, and I'm sure my dad said, hey, we're taking this family home on our way home, and we're going to give them a ride. And I remember saying, I'm not getting in that van. I'm not getting in the van with the Cotton family. Like I said, the Cotton family, they kind of talked funny. They kind of smelled funny. And I remember sitting in the back of that van, and I probably cried the whole way because there was this overwhelming smell that just took your breath away. You see, that was the family that the community would reject. That was the family that the community would turn their backs to and say, no, you can figure it out. But my dad extended a hand of grace. My dad extended his love and his kindness, and he welcomed this family into our van, and we took them home. I vividly remember the next day going somewhere and getting into the van, and the smell was still there. How, Dad, how? My dad modeled what it looked like to serve those who are different from the rest. My dad modeled what it looked like to serve those who are different from the rest. I remember hearing stories of my parents sharing about this same family. They would stop. They knew where my parents lived. I was too little to remember this, but they would come, and my parents would welcome them into their home, and they would welcome them to their dinner table. They would welcome them to the table, that intimate place, and they would serve them. They didn't say, hey, could you go home and change your clothes? Could you go home and take a shower and then come back? They welcomed them in. Who is sitting at our table? Several years ago in my time at Aimrite, I had a young man that was a part of our programs, and he had kind of started out on the fence. He didn't want to get too plugged in. He didn't want to get too involved. He was kind of too cool to be at church. But over time, and it took a while, we invited him and asked him to be a part, and slowly, just over time, he became a part of our family. He became a part of Aimrite and plugged into the community, and he was a young man that the year it was coming down to graduation, and he wasn't going to make it. The night before graduation, we worked well into the night to accomplish and finish his classes, to take his tests, to do everything he could do online to get that diploma. I wish I could stand up here in front of you today and say that this young man is walking with the Lord. I wish that I could say that the amount of times that I've invited him into my home and the amount of times that I've invited him to my table, that he's walking with the Lord. The reality is he's probably the furthest from the Lord than he's been for a while. But yet that doesn't stop me from wanting to serve and wanting me to reach out and love this young man. That doesn't stop me from answering his phone calls or sending him a text or reaching out to encourage him. Church, I know that it can get discouraging in a couple of different ways. I know it can get discouraging because sometimes we feel like we pour out and we pour into so many people and nothing happens. Some of you guys might be sitting here this morning and saying, man, I don't even know who to reach out to. Some of us might feel like we live in this gospel-saturated community that we don't even know who the unchurched are to reach. Where do we start? Where do we begin? One of the biggest adjustments for me, transitioning from being at Aimrite in Phoenix to now working for the church conference, one of the biggest adjustments was on a daily basis in Phoenix, I had the opportunity to work with unchurched people everywhere I went, everything I did. I was not in a gospel-saturated environment. I wasn't in a gospel-saturated bubble. I had this opportunity, and transitioning into my new role at CMC, I feel like I'm in this gospel-saturated environment, and I got to get out of it. It's like, I'm not knocking it, so don't hear that, please. But I had to make some adjustments to my schedule. I had to make some adjustments to my week to be able to live and feel like I was accomplishing something. So I made some adjustments. I got out of the office. I made some changes to my schedule to where I now work remotely in different places in the community as best as you can in a small community. I go to the places that are not the church. I work out of a coffee shop. I work out of a Panera Bread every couple weeks. I work out of places where I have the opportunity to interact and meet people that may just not know Jesus. Because guess what? When I walk into my office, Delaney, she knows Jesus. Janelle, she knows Jesus. Brian, he knows Jesus. We have to sharpen each other. We have to sharpen each other just like it says in Proverbs. But man, I've got this hunger. I've got this desire to be in a place where people don't know Jesus. My challenge to us this morning is who are we inviting to our table that doesn't know Jesus? Who are we connecting with that doesn't have a relationship with Jesus? I know you guys are busting at the seams, but I see some empty seats. Who could we bring along? Who could we invite into this space? Maybe it's not inviting into this space, but maybe God is calling you and say, hey, I want you to go. Maybe he specifically said, I want you to go to this city or to this community or to this town, and I want you to serve my people. Where is God calling you? Like I said, I know it can be challenging. I know in our environments it can feel overwhelming and where to start. How do we do this? But I've got 3 points for us today. I think 3. 1, 2, 3. Yep. Sorry, it's been a long couple days. I've got 3 points for us to work through. Step number 1. I know this sometimes feels like a given, but church, if we're honest, how many times do we take a step forward? How many times do we make a decision without pausing and asking God for wisdom and direction? I'll be the first to admit, probably more often than not, do I approach a decision, do I approach moving forward in something, and do I very rarely stop and pray? Sometimes we feel like we've got it. We can do this. But step number 1, I feel like is an important place to go. It's a foundational thing. It's what we build everything off of is prayer. And some of you guys might say, this sounds really selfish, but I think we've got to pray for ourselves. I think we have to pray for an openness and a willingness to want to go and reach the lost. I know that sounds kind of crazy. I know it sounds kind of crazy that we should pray and ask for an openness and willingness, but church, it's true. I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. Churches across America are guilty of it. We've come to this place where we're just comfortable coming and sitting in comfortable chairs and letting the pastor preach and letting the worship pastor sing, letting the kids directors do their thing, and we go out the doors. We're comfortable with that. I hate to say it, but I think we've lost compassion for the lost. Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38 says this. It says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field. Guys, we need to pray for compassion for the lost. Now I've read, and I'm going to assume that it's true. I've read that if you could translate this section of scripture that I just read, the compassion that Jesus had for these people that he says that were broken, that were without a shepherd, it said that people have said that it's this compassion, it's this moving of the bowels. I know, a little nasty to think about. It's this moving of the bowels. It's like, if you've gone and you've had either a good meal and it's like, man, that thing's moving quick. There's some pain. You've got some gas pain. You've got this pain in the side of your stomach. It says Jesus was moved with physical pain for the people without a shepherd. What is our response? Do we see the brokenness out there and just say, you know what, people will be people? Are we moved with compassion for people that are trying to identify as something that they're not? Are we hurt and are we burdened by people that are living in the LGBTQ communities? Are we burdened by that, or do we just sit back and say, you know what? That's them. They'll figure it out. Are we burdened by that we want to engage and we want to reach people living in those environments? I'll say it from the stage. Some of my best friends are a part of that community. Some of my best friends are a part of that community, and I have a burden for their souls. And I love them, and I interact with them because my heart breaks for them. They need Jesus. We don't just send them out the doors and say, figure it out. We need to engage. We need to live life with those people. They need to see the hope of Jesus in our lives. They need to see a great picture of who the church is. We need to be willing. I was a part of a leadership development weekend in northern Indiana this weekend, and one of the things that pastors and leadership teams were talking, are we willing? Are you willing to do what God is asking you to do? Or are you just content? I hope this morning lights something underneath your hind end, your backside. I hope something lights behind you and there's a little bit of an uncomfortableness that says, man, I want to be willing, but I'm not sure if I am. God, would you help me become willing? Lastly, in this one here is that pray that we would see others as Jesus sees them. Ephesians 2:10 says, for we are God's handiwork. Other translations say masterpiece. One of my favorite scriptures. We like to think that about ourselves. We like to think that, man, I'm God's masterpiece. I'm created in His image to do good works. But would you guys agree with me that those who are far from Jesus are still created as God's masterpiece? They have a mission. They have an agenda to accomplish, but we have to help them discover who they are. I did some recent study on Barabbas. We're familiar with Barabbas. He's the guy that the Jewish people said, release Barabbas, crucify Jesus. And as I was studying about Barabbas the other week, I had to think, do I truly believe that Barabbas was God's masterpiece? Do I truly believe that Barabbas is God's masterpiece? If you break down the name of Barabbas, it means son of the Father. I walked away from studying that and I had this great picture, and I'm not sure if anybody's ever thought this before or if I'm just the weird one, but I said, I hope that the day that I arrive to heaven, I hope that I see Barabbas. I hope that I see the man that Jesus released. We know nothing else about Barabbas other than he walks down off that stage and goes, and who knows what he does. Did he ever accept the gift? I have no idea. but I hope that I get to see Barabbas because he is a masterpiece. Next, we need to be working at building relationships. We need to build relationships. We need to build relationships with people who don't have a relationship with Jesus. Where do we do that? How do we do that? Who goes to the grocery store? Who walks your neighborhood? Whose kids are in public school here in the community? Sometimes we think that we live in this gospel-saturated environment, but the reality is that if we look far enough, actually close enough, we'll find people that don't have a relationship with Jesus. Parents, build relationships with kids in your school, in your kids' school. Invite kids into your home. That's a great place to start. Build relationships with those kids. That grows into building relationships with your parents. Because you know one of those kids is going to go home and tell their mom how great Bobby's mom's chocolate chip cookies are. He's going to go home and he's going to say, Mom, I had the best chocolate chip cookies ever. You've got to go taste Bobby's mom's chocolate chip cookies. That's where it starts. It doesn't start here. It starts in our home. We need to be committed. If we feel God leading us in this direction, we need to be committed to others. We need to be willing to walk through the messiness of life. We need to be willing to walk through the divorce with another family. We need to be willing to walk through the tension of an unhealthy family environment and an unhealthy family's home. Do you know how uncomfortable it is to sit with another family and feel the tension and hear the arguing and the bickering back and forth? Guys, they need the light of Jesus in that situation. They need the light of Jesus in that moment. We need to sit at their table. Sometimes we want to control everything. Sometimes we want to control what's on the table. Sometimes we want to control it. But the reality is that we need to enter into their environment as well. We need to enter into their space. It shows them that we care. It shows them that we want to invest. And lastly, I don't have it up here, but we need to be available. Several years ago, and some of you guys may have heard this story, but several years ago, the same young man that I worked with prior to him graduating and helped him to finish high school, and a couple years ago, I get a phone call about 12 o'clock at night, and it was from this young man's sister, and she's saying, Caleb, hurry, we need you. My brother's out of control. He's threatening to shoot my dad. I tell you what, that'll wake you up just like that. I'm a sound sleeper. Nolan said I was snoring last night. I don't believe him, but he said I was snoring. I'm a sound sleeper. Very little wakes me up. I jumped out of bed. I hopped in the truck, and I went to this young man's house, and I get to the backyard, and it's pure chaos. This young man is pinned up against the wall. People are yelling. People are shouting. He's yelling, let me go, let me go. I'm going to kill my dad. And I walked back into the backyard, and I walked up to him, and I pinned him against the wall, and the people that were holding them, I said, everybody get out of here. There was too much chaos. There was too much commotion. And this was about 12:30 at night. And I stood there and pinned this young man against the wall for the next 2 or 3 hours. Actually, we went from the wall to the ground. We got him to the ground, and I'm a big guy. He was a big guy. I'm bigger than him. But it was everything I could do to not have him move out from underneath me. I pinned him to the ground. I laid there, and I said, we're not moving until you calm down. We're not moving until you relax. An hour or so had passed by, and I look out of the corner of my eye, and I see this shadow running towards us, and this young man by the name of Sonny, 350, maybe 375. He's a big guy. He says, Cable guy, get off my friend. Cable guy, get off my friend. You can't do that to him. And next thing I know, Sonny is now laying on top of me, trying to pull me off of his friend. And I said, Sonny, I just looked at him. I said, man, if you don't get off of me right now, your night is not going to end well. He gets off of me and he gets down on my face. He said, you can't treat my friend like this. I said, I'm not going to let your friend make a mistake that he's going to regret for the rest of his life. We've got to be available. We've got to be willing to walk through the mess of life. I got home at 3:30 that morning and I laid in bed and I said, what just happened? I hope I never have to do that again. The sad part of the story is 2 weeks before that, I was called to this young man's house as well because the cops had shown up and him and Sonny had been drinking in the front yard and the cops had come. And that night I was the only thing that stood between them and jail. Guys, we got to be willing to go through the mess of life with the lost. How do we do that? I'll tell you, it's the power of the Holy Spirit. Right? Jesus says, I promise you that I'm going to send somebody. When I go from you, the Father will send somebody to you. He sends us the Holy Spirit. Lastly, as I go through this, if the band wants to come up, we need to understand that it's a journey. We need to understand that this is a journey. We live in a results-driven society. We live in a results-driven culture that we want to see results like that. I want to lose 20 pounds before Thanksgiving. I want to see it like that, just so I can gain it back at Thanksgiving. Right? We want to see results. We want to see things happen. But it's a journey. John 4:38 says, I've sent you out to the harvest field that you haven't planted, where many others have labored long before you. And now you are privileged to profit from the labors and reap the harvest. Guys, some of us are called to play different parts along this journey. Some of us are called to plant the seeds. But even before the seed is planted, we've got to cultivate the soil. Earlier this week, I got to reap the joy of running a tractor and a grain cart for several hours for my father-in-law in his field. I didn't have to do any of the work. I just got to show up, sit in the tractor, drive the tractor down and forth, back and forth the field. That's all I had to do. I didn't have to sweat. I didn't have to put in the hours of prepping the ground, but I got to reap the joy of something that I enjoy. I got to reap. That was my benefit. Some are called to plant the seeds. Some are called to keep that seed growing in a healthy environment. And someday we might see a harvest. It takes a long time to see a harvest. The farmers don't just plant the seed and wake up the next morning and harvest it. It takes a long time. Church, we need to be willing to journey with people. We need to be willing to journey with people, knowing that we may not see the results that we want to see. I don't know what this means for Light in the Valley. I don't know what this means for you guys sitting here this morning. But can I say this? If God's calling you, would you be willing to say yes? Would you be willing to step out and go with what God is calling you to do? I know there's some discussion happening here at the church about what are our next steps. You guys are, every time I come, the seats come back further. Next time, I'm probably going to open that door and walk into a row of chairs. It's been amazing. I've seen this growth over the past couple years. Man, what God is calling you to do is a big thing. Is God calling you to start something new? Is God stirring something inside of you, inside of a couple of you, inside of a family here in the Light in the Valley? Is he stirring you to go and start something new? Man, I would encourage you, leap into that calling. Jump into that calling. Continue to work and focus on discipling and building up families and young people here in this community. But let's begin to think about out there. Let's begin to think about who is sitting at our table and who are we inviting into our space so we can share the love of Jesus.